in this alternative universe, what if Donald Trump and Michelle Obama were actually married? What would the difficulties in their relationship sound like if they were faced with regular marriage problems and one of them began engaging in the practice of stonewalling? And ChatGPT spit out a story that is, well, I guess you're just going to have to listen.
I have put everything into this relationship. What do I have to show for it?
This is not what I signed up for.
I'm afraid of what will happen to the kids if we get a divorce. I'm afraid of what will happen to me if I stay in this marriage.
I'm not even sure that I believe in love anymore.
I want to stay married, but I don't even know why, because it's not making me happy.
How can I feel so alone when I'm not even single?
So many people are struggling with this exact thing.
We have to normalize the struggle.
I mean, a perfect relationship, what is that? Does that even exist?
Having a metric to gauge where you are right now.
Staying in isolation, it's a death sentence.
It's almost like being buried alive.
Positive change just doesn't happen overnight. I mean, do you even want it to? Well, no, of course you want it to happen overnight.
This is how we decide to walk in the promise of life more abundantly.
Ultimately, you are the one who decides how good your relationship is.
Take the next step.
Borrow someone else's hope.
Borrow our hope.
Every relationship
always has room to grow.
Welcome to the Let's Grow Together podcast. It's the Grow in Love show. I am Danny at Growth Coach D on social media, and I have with me the one and only Coach Elary Hall. Come on down.
Woo! I'm the next contestant on.
Yay,
Let's
the
grow
Grow in
together.
Love show. Let's grow together. Let's grow. You know, Elary, I just had to say, and we just did a practice run by accident because we weren't recording. And I was pointing out how wonderful it is to work with someone who loves fun as much as I do. Thank you. Thank you for embracing the fun piece. And we want to encourage couples to always, as much as you can, have fun together, laugh together, because that helps to be able to lighten the mood and, get you through those challenging times, which we all have them. But, laughing a little kind of helps. What would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We got married because we thought it was going to be fun. We thought it was going to bring more joy into our lives. And like you said, we have those dark times, but there's no reason that they can't exist together.
Exactly.
Right? There's no reason that we can't inject some fun even when we're feeling down.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And one of our very fundamental things that we mention as often as we can is to normalize the struggle. And so why laughing and having fun is so important is because there are times when it's hard, when it's difficult. And we've been spending some time dissecting the research of Dr. John Gottman, who has taken this entity of marriage and kind of put a scientific spin on it. So he is able to, with over 90% accuracy, listen to a couple interact for a few minutes and then say whether or not their relationship is going to last or if it's going to end in divorce. And I didn't believe him till I read the book and then started pairing what I heard, what I read in the book, with what I've seen in reality, what I've experienced in my own life. And I am now very certain that he's on to something. And he has these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that we've been going through. And Coach Elary, can you give us just an overview of what we've covered thus far and maybe an introduction into what we're going to cover today?
Absolutely. So we're actually going to go over the 4th horseman, and we've been trying to do them in order from like least threatening, least lethal to most lethal, which means that tonight we're doing the mother of all of the horsemen, the worst possible one. In a moment.
Dun, 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 dun.
So the first one is criticism. The second one is defensiveness. The third one is contempt.
Mm-hmm.
And number 4, our topic tonight is stonewalling.
Ooh.
And one of the things we kind of talked about is how they're kind of connected, right? So criticism is kind of like contempt light. And also stonewalling is like defensiveness to the max, right?
Yeah, that's good. So with stonewalling, we are really kind of coming, oftentimes when people get to this point and stay there over an extended period of time, it's not a good sign. However, we're here to give you hope, because what we do know is that if you, on listening to what won't work, begin to make a shift, you're going to be able to radically transform the situation you're in. And every relationship always has room to grow. Every relationship has room to grow. And we want you to declare that that prophetic word in Ezekiel chapter 37 over your marriage. Hear the word of the Lord. Whatever is dead, whatever seems dried up, whatever seems like it has no life, it's a new day, and the best is yet to come. And as we discover the difficulties that arise when we have these practices, and we understand that we all end up having some of these things in our relationships, we're going to look at what the solutions are, what the alternatives are, so that we can, in a fun way, begin to add these to our repertoire, to our toolbox, so that we can continue growing in love. Because if love's not growing, there's only one other alternative. And Coach Elary, I don't know, but I don't think it's an alternative that most people want for their marriage.
Right. But it's one that we've all felt at some point in
Mm-hmm.
time. Absolutely. And so I just love the opportunity that we have to have this kind of a growth mindset, because so often we're kind of looking for the fortune cookie. You know, we're trying to find the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Did I marry the wrong person? Is this worth
Mm-hmm.
saving? Kind of these big things. And we're looking for like signs as to whether or not this relationship is worth it, whether it can be saved. And we're really here to say every relationship has room to grow. That's what the Gottmans are saying as well. Is that just because right now these things are manifesting doesn't mean that they have to stay, but our first step is awareness. We have to realize the seriousness of allowing these habits to take place in our relationships. And it does. We have antidotes to every single one of these 4 horsemen. So for the antidote to criticism, which was the first one, is a gentle startup, right? So we don't just come in guns blazing. This is what I don't like about you, right? That we're able to, we talk about I statements and really talk about and taking as much responsibility as you can for that, because criticism is always, it's always destructive, right? It's always saying you're doing something that I don't like. You're not enough. That's the underlying thing. So when we have a gentle startup, rather than waiting for things to take forever until we get crazy about it, right, we're going to be able to have a better outcome. And so the antidote to defensiveness really quickly is taking responsibility, right? To really kind of have that opportunity to actually listen to what your partner is saying. And before you get so defensive, really try to be open. And how can I take responsibility for what this person is saying, right? And just like Jesus taught us that we do agree with our enemy when we're in the way with him. And also agree with your spouse when you're in the way with them as well. Why not, right? If it works for one, it's got to be even better for your spouse. So, and the third one, contempt, the antidote to that is to build a culture of appreciation in your relationship, right? And this is just what we do. We appreciate what we do for each other. Sure, there's going to be things that we don't like, right? We know that we're different people and everybody's got something, right? But as we grow that culture of appreciation, that is the antidote to contempt. But before we go on and talk about the antidote to stonewalling, we had a little experiment that we did
this was fun.
in preparation for talking about stonewalling today. Yes.
This was really fun.
And, you know, everyone's talking about AI. And Coach Danny is loving AI and all the things that it's doing. Yes.
Yes.
And it's a time saver for so many different things. And it can be a lot of fun, right? So using AI actually in your relationship, maybe that's something.
Ooh, that's a whole nother project. That's a whole nother idea. But I think it's one worth exploring. But what we did was we put a scenario into ChatGPT, and this was a fun experiment. You came up with this experiment. I remember when I was like, Wow, that's actually really creative. In this alternative universe, what if Donald Trump and Michelle Obama were actually married? What would the difficulties in their relationship sound like if they were faced with regular marriage problems and one of them began engaging in the practice of stonewalling? And ChatGPT spit out a story that is, well, I guess you're just going to have to listen.
You're just going to have to listen. So I'm going to go ahead
You're
and
just
read
going to
this.
have to listen. Okay. And as you're preparing to read that, Ellie, I just want to remind the people in our kingdom and those who might be listening for the first time that we have resources that can help you begin to chart a course from wherever you are right now to a better place. And I want to encourage you, especially my M Squad members, to make sure that you have regularly and systematically been doing your marriage report card and your RPM. The marriage report card helps you get the vital signs for your unique one-of-a-kind relationship. And as Elary talked about those 3 horsemen, it's built in that you can have workarounds to some of the challenges and difficulties that we normally have, especially when we're just kind of talking, because most of us don't have very much training, and talking can be one of the most dangerous things a couple can do. At the word of Harville Hendricks, another one of my favorite authors. So the marriagereportcard.com is going to give you access to some information, the vital signs, in a way that's effective, efficient, and non-combative. I want to encourage those of you who might not know that it's available. It's absolutely free, and it can help you begin the process of charting a course to a better place, to your ultimate relationship goals. And now we're going to hear from ChatGPT on what happens in this alternative universe where Michelle Obama and Donald Trump are actually married. Oh my goodness.
Once upon a time, in a reality that defied all probability, Donald Trump and Michelle Obama found themselves bound in matrimony. As the 45th president of the United States and the former first lady, their newfound partnership promised to be an extraordinary tale of conflicting ideologies, extraordinary circumstances, and the power of love. In the early days of their marriage, it became immediately apparent that their contrasting personas clashed more than they harmonized. Michelle represented grace, intelligence, and compassion, while Donald embodied brashness, unpredictability, and self-assuredness. Their differences were not merely political, but extended into almost every aspect of their lives. One especially sunny day, their arguments reached a boiling point when Michelle, a firm believer in addressing issues openly, confronted Donald about his habit of stonewalling when faced with difficult conversations. Over the years, she had grown frustrated with his tendency to shut down and avoid engaging in meaningful dialogue. Donald, we need to talk about this. We can't simply sweep our problems under the rug, Michelle implored, her voice tinged with frustration. Trump, accustomed to avoiding confrontation, initially met her appeal with a dismissive wave of his hand. You're blowing this out of proportion, Michelle. It's just how I am. And you knew that when you married me, he reported, his voice filled with defiance. Undeterred, Michelle refused to back down. Marriage involves compromise, Donald. Stonewalling won't get us anywhere. We must learn to communicate openly and honestly. Days turned into weeks, and still the walls between the couple grew higher. Frustration seeped into every interaction, jeopardizing their love and the trust they once held for each other. It seemed as if they were on the brink of collapse, their marriage an island divided. One rainy evening, as Michelle poised herself on the edge of surrender, a revelation struck her. Instead of focusing on changing Donald, perhaps it was time to change her approach. She decided to engage in a bold experiment to pierce the impenetrable armor of stonewalling that Donald had built around himself. Using every ounce of her perseverance, Michelle planned a surprise evening. In the warmth of their home, she transformed a room into a sanctuary of light, adorned with roses and scented candles. Soft music filled the air, playing melodies once cherished by both of them. As Donald walked into the room, his heart softened in response to the genuine effort Michelle had put into reviving their connection. He could not ignore the love that sparkled in her eyes or the yearning for reconciliation that permeated the room. Caught off guard by her audacious gesture, Donald took a moment to gather his thoughts before he finally spoke. I know I have a tendency to close myself off, Michelle, but I see how it hurts you. And that's the last thing I want. Maybe it's time for me to let those walls crumble, he confessed, his voice laced with vulnerability. Tears welled up in Michelle's eyes as she reached out to hold his hands. Donald, I believe in us. We can overcome anything if we choose to communicate and understand each other, even when we disagree, she replied, her voice filled with hope. And so from that moment on, their love story took an unexpected turn. Donald Trump and Michelle Obama embarked on a new journey together, a journey rooted in empathy, understanding, and a commitment to dismantling the barriers that stood between them. It was a journey that challenged them to confront their differences, embrace their similarities, and inspire unity in a world that needed it most. Though the challenges of their marriage persisted, Donald and Michelle discovered the immense power of mutual respect and open conversation. Their story became a testament to the extraordinary possibilities that unfold when two individuals, even from seemingly opposite ends of the spectrum, come together with love as their guiding force.
That's good. Right before we unpack that, we're just going to have a brief message from one of our sponsors. The M Squad exists to provide a community of safe space for couples fighting together for a love that lasts forever. You don't have to stay in isolation trying to figure out how to make your relationship work on your own. Come and join a community of like-minded couples as we all work together towards building, growing, and establishing a thriving relationship that lasts a lifetime. Click the link in our bio and explore the M Squad so that you can experience the joy of love for as long as you both shall live. And as we're coming back to our regular scheduled program, we have let's unpack this story, Elary, with Donald and Michelle. First of all, I think a disclosure statement may be in order because there's some people that are very, very hypersensitive to the realities of politics and personalities. This was just a hypothetical scenario that we put into ChatGPT because we were looking at how a situation could play out where you have polar opposites. People have different personalities, different ideologies, what it looks like when they face troubling circumstances and what the path to a better place might look like for them. And artificial intelligence did a pretty decent job giving us this alternative reality. And Elary, I'll ask you first, what do you think that they did right? You know, what went well in this scenario?
Well, I think it was really kind of showing what happens to a lot of couples as far as kind of getting stymied when stonewalling comes in to the relationship, right? It just went on and it went on and it went on and it made things more awkward and it was difficult. But what I really liked in this was the idea that you can actually, even if you aren't the one stonewalling, right? Michelle took some personal responsibility in this story. And what she wanted to do was to reaffirm her love and her commitment to the relationship and to her spouse. Now, of course, it's ridiculous. You know, when Michelle, I feel awkward even talking about it like it's a real relationship, right? But seeing that she had some additional power, and so often the reason that we are being defensive or we are stonewalling, it's because we feel so threatened.
Say that.
Right, absolutely. And so even if you're not the one who's stonewalling, that doesn't mean that you don't have any influence or any ability to contribute to get things on to the next level. But so often when our spouse is doing something that we know isn't helping the relationship, we start blaming and we start pointing fingers and we're like, well, I'm just waiting. The ball's in their court. Right.
Yeah. If I can just run us back just for a quick moment. You said we feel threatened. What are some of the whys? Because sometimes we experience these things, but it's hard for us to put language to the whys. Why is it so threatening when we experience stonewalling? when the person who's the love of our lives ceases to communicate and is like this stone wall and it's just unresponsive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably a good time to really talk about what stonewalling is, like an
Yeah.
actual definition. And here,
Mhm.
what Gottman says, stonewalling often happens when a couple is talking. The
Mhm.
stonewaller just removes himself by turning into a stone wall.
Mhm.
Usually someone who is listening reacts to what the speaker is saying, looks at the speaker and says things like, uh-huh, or mm-hmm, to let the speaker know that he is tracking. But the stonewaller abandons these messages, replacing them with stony silence.
Hmm.
So it just becomes a part. And sometimes stonewallers will actually leave. Like that's another way to stonewall, is to take yourself out of the situation
Mhm.
when your partner is trying to have a conversation. And
Wow.
like John Gottman says here, it's so often it is a conversation that
Hmm.
is what brings these things up.
And so it's almost like, if I can, for a man, especially if you're trying to have a conversation with someone and they literally don't respond, it's the epitome of disrespect. And men don't respond well to being disrespected. And the person who's doing the disrespecting in this instance is the one who's supposed to have the closest feelings of affection and adoration and reverence, and to end up in a situation where you're trying to communicate and there's nothing, that has to have a negative impact on relationships. I see why this is one of Gottman's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And when you get here, you're really on dangerous ground. It's almost like quicksand, because it's hard to recover if there's no communication. For a romantic relationship is like blood is to the body. You have to have communication in order to have a relationship. And at the point that one party is just like, it's over, whether directly or indirectly, it's almost like the blood to your arm is now stopped, and you're going to lose your arm. I guess I'm getting to the point. My point is this, for men especially, stonewalling could be a very big deal. And I wanted to ask from a female perspective, what men might not see when it comes to how a female would perceive stonewall. I know for men, to me, it's the epitome of disrespect. What would it be for a woman from the female perspective?
Right. For a woman, I think that stonewalling is abandonment.
Hmm.
You're now alone. And it
Hmm.
also is saying whatever you're talking about does not matter. So it's kind of so from that point, it's not so much that like it is in some way, it's a little bit belittling.
Mm-hmm.
So that disrespect is there. But I think for a woman, it's much more so, I am not here for you.
Mm.
You are on your own.
Wow.
And so and it's interesting because John Gottman says that 85% of the time stonewalling is done by men.
I'm not surprised by that statistic. But it's not a gender issue, but it's important to recognize how often men revert to this tactic. And I think, not to get away from our storyline, because I do want to come back to the storyline, but I think that one of the reasons why men might be more guilty of stonewalling is we don't have a command of language the way most women do. And so sometimes the only thing we can do in a moment is like, stop talking. I don't know what to say. I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't have words to describe this feeling. This situation has gone from bad to worse, and I'm scared of what I might say. I'm scared of what I might do. The best thing for me to say is nothing at all. And it can easily be perceived as abandonment. In fact, I've worked with several people where that is the perception. And so he doesn't care. He's just checked out. He doesn't, where He cares, but he just doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what to say. And so it's important for us to have these conversations and this dialogue, because maybe Donald in this scenario just didn't have the words.
Absolutely. And I think, Danny, you brought up something that is very key and is very helpful for women who find themselves in that situation, is that this is a response that a man is having because he's trying to preserve the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I'm stopping this now because it's not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And as women, we see it very differently, because we're like, well, we're going to talk it out. That's what we're here to do. And I can't talk it out if you stop talking. Right. So what we see as the solution, a man will see as, how can it get any better? It just keeps getting worse. Like, why do you think that doing the same thing is going to make the situation better?
That's really good. That's really powerful. Can you say that last part again one more time?
Yeah. Why do you think that the same thing is going to make the situation any better? But as women, that's how we operate.
Mm-hmm.
We talk things through. We listen to each other. And we think that we're going to find something deeper the more that we talk, because that's our experience.
Yeah, men don't usually talk a whole lot. I think that I might be the exception, but in general, men have fewer words, and they don't know how to. It takes us a while to process what is being said, what is being shared, especially when it's being when it's offering a complaint that's a reflection of me. Like, I have to process that, because I thought I was perfect. I thought that I was doing a good job. We have a roof over our head. We have food in the refrigerator. We drive a car that successfully gets from point A to point B. I thought I was doing okay, and you're telling me that I'm not, and this is seemingly going nowhere. We're on this hamster wheel, and the only thing that I can do in this moment, since you have so many words, is just to stop talking, because you're going to keep talking anyway. No matter if I say anything, I'm not going to be right. I'm not going to get my point across. And so what's the point of this process? So I might as well just become a stonewall.
Absolutely. And so I'm glad that we're able to kind of talk about both sides of this behavior, right? It doesn't happen in isolation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You don't start stonewalling by yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a cause, there's an effect. And I think we've done a good job of really kind of talking about why this happens and why it's so frequent. Right. And we absolutely have to understand that it wouldn't be listed in this book if it wasn't happening all over the place.
Yeah.
Right. And even if we think about it, even if you're not the stonewaller in your relationship, if you think about it, there's times that you've done it. There's times that you've done it too, even if it's not your go-to. There's times, and you do it for the exact same reasons. Because I don't have any hope that talking right now is going to improve things.
That's good. That's actually really good. So let's get back to the story here in our scenario.
Okay,
So
absolutely.
We had Donald and Michelle Obama in this alternative universe, trying to make their marriage work. ChatGPT wrote us this story, and we were able to kind of see where they were getting it wrong. We're establishing the fact that stonewalling is, pretty bad. It's not usually going to end well. And I want to look at, hey, if they did anything right. Was there anything that they did well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think they did have a good feeling for what stonewalling is, right? When the communication stops. And I like that they had just a new beginning. Yeah. That Michelle, she took that responsibility. And then, and this is another thing that Gottman's talk about, is bids or offers and repair attempts.
Yes,
right.
The repair attempts are key.
Yes. And so there are times what happens is, if you can get so hurt, and this will happen, that it's never enough. There can't be enough apology for you. Right. And so the thing that happened was that there was this great gesture, and it wasn't one of complaint, and it wasn't, and by the way, we need to keep talking about this. Right, which is what brings the defensiveness, which is what brings the stonewalling, is the insistence that we have to do this now, right? Which is coming from a deep fear, right? That has Okay, we're not going to go into that, but just that there was an attempt made and it was received. Right. So Donald definitely took Michelle's repair attempt, and they were able to continue it. And I also liked how ChatGPT got it right, that these problems persisted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It wasn't a one and done. Oh, and then they lived happily ever after. No, there were still problems. But through the willingness to keep the communication open and kind of the self-awareness of the role that you're playing in this scenario, in this, actually, Danny and I right now are working on a really great resource that's talking about the hamster wheel in our favorite fight. And so this is going to be another one of our free resources that we're offering out into the world, because it's such a common problem that we find ourselves in these patterns that get deeper and deeper every time that we do them. And how do we get off? How do we break this pattern? And part of that is understanding the part that you play, taking responsibility for that. And so I think that was really great to understand, this is something that's going to happen. And again, we're going to keep a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. This doesn't mean that our relationship is doomed. And in fact, it doesn't even mean that your relationship is bad. And that's another one of the great, that's one of the great things that the Gottmans do, is they really normalize that and realize that marriages that are really working aren't 100%. They're not just, lollipops and rainbows.
No.
That there's difficulty in everyone. It just depends on really how the couple views their struggle.
Yeah, but they're messy relationships. Everybody gets dirty, and it's one of these phenomenons that doesn't matter how religious you are, doesn't matter your socioeconomic status, it doesn't matter which political affiliation, nothing matters. You're going to face some of these same problems. The best thing we can do is equip you with tools so that you can help to fix them in constructive ways, so that you're not continuing that downward spiral. And that's why we push you to resources like the Marriage Report Card. That's why we're developing this hamster wheel resource, because as you analyze what's happening, you don't have to continue in the same destructive cycle. There is a better way. And that's why we're here. We're all about getting out of isolation, normalizing the struggle, offering these solutions, because ultimately every relationship always has room to grow. And that's why we're here.
Have you thought about how important your marriage is lately? We have been. Coach Danny and I have been thinking about how important every marriage is. And that's why we started the M Squad, couples fighting together for a love that lasts forever. Because we know that couples, gosh, it is harder than you think. After the I do, now what do I do now? So we have the M Squad, an opportunity for you to get out of isolation, to be able to get with other couples, to be able to hear other people. What are they struggling with? Is what you're going through normal? Is this really how marriage is supposed to be? Are there other ways that we can get through these difficult times? The answer is yes. I want you to check it out, themsquad.com, themsquad.com, to give you the strength that you need, the accountability that you need to make real differences in your marriage.
Now, we've talked about why stonewalling is an appealing strategy. We've touched on what the antidote is, but if we were going to be more, laser focused on what the solution is, how is someone, whether it's a husband or a wife, how is someone to react and respond if they are being stonewalled?
Absolutely. Well, I think that it needs to be a sign. And unfortunately, a lot of times we put that meaning on my marriage is doomed, right? When anyone starts stonewalling, you're like, this is over. This isn't ever going to work. I can't live like this, right? Those are the things that our mind kind of brings to us. If we can instead understand what's really going on, which is my spouse has had enough, right? And this is something that's so important to understand, this concept of flooding, of emotional flooding. And women's tolerance for emotion is much higher than men's.
Woo, say that again. Typically,
a woman's now I can't even say it. A
Yeah,
woman
we
tolerant.
can't handle it. We can't handle the emotion. Like there's that line, you can't handle the truth. We can't handle all the flooding is the best phrase that Gottman came up with, because when it's like water over our head and there's no life preserver and we don't know what to do. We just die. We just die in the moment.
Right. And it's something that is, and it's just very, it's important to understand that. Because again, we're putting on the meaning, he doesn't care about me. He doesn't love me. He's never going to change. We're never going to get to the bottom of this issue. Right. All those things instead of, oh, my spouse is overwhelmed. That's all that this means. My spouse is overwhelmed.
And I can't tell you how many times, Elary, I've had women verbalize what you just verbalized, that and their husband's like, I never said that. Yes, well, that's the way I felt. But I never said that. When did I say that, I was done with you, that I'm tired of this, and that I'm moving out tomorrow? But like meaning starts being applied to the action of a husband not knowing what to do with these emotions. And she's just like, this is over. And he's just like, I don't know what to do. But there's hope. And if we can recognize that, hey, we don't have to attach that meaning, because 9 times out of 10, well, more often than not, when a husband is stonewalling, it's just because he's flooding. He's flooded. There is a relationship between the two. It's a difference. So we wanted to talk about the difference between flooding and stonewalling. But can you walk us, Elary, into what Gottman says flooding is? And then let's just briefly unpack why it's so common, especially in men, flooding, and then the distinction between flooding and stonewalling.
Well, certainly the flooding is kind of what happens as a result, usually of criticism, right? Which is what is, and that's another thing that Gottman talks about. The antidote to defensiveness is being able to understand the request underneath the criticism, right? That it's not really about you're terrible, but it's really more about what does she need?
Because there's always a request underneath it.
That's part of it as well. Yes, there's always a request underneath the criticism, right? And sometimes we're not very good at articulating that. Often we're not very good at and that goes into a lot of reasons, the way that women are wired and the reasons that they're wired that way. I mean, it all makes sense. It's all in God's greater plan, right? To bring us together and to learn to be one, because we do need each other. Okay. What was the question? No, flooding and stonewalling.
Yeah, flooding.
And so flooding is kind of the response. Flooding is the response to the criticism, a lot of times, to the emotion that's happening, that's coming. And that's why it's so important that we have that gentle startup. We have the I statements, and that it's not an emotional wave coming at your partner, at your spouse, because that wave that's coming out of you of emotion then floods the partner. And it makes absolute sense that my response to that is a dam, right? Is a wall, is to be able to contain that, to be able to say, I'm not doing this anymore, right? And it's very interesting too, because, so often our emotions are leading us to action. And when you're a man and you're feeling attacked, what's the action? Yeah, right? Is to defend yourself. And it could be in a physical way. And so in a very real way, the stonewalling is a way that the man is trying to protect his wife from himself.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's very, very true. Stonewalling is a way that men try to protect our wives from ourselves. That's a powerful statement. But it's not productive. It's not effective. And it leads to an outcome that you don't want for your romantic relationship. So because of that, we must look at alternatives. We must look at the antidote. We must consider what we can do to prevent this fourth horseman of the apocalypse from taking up residence in your home, because it's normal and natural for it to happen. But if it's happening more often than not, and if we don't develop those strategies, then we're not going to be able to get to that better place, which is more than possible if we're able to, just get unstuck and shift our mind to those infinite possibilities that exist. And so we're kind of coming to the end of our time here. We talked about providing solutions because there's an analogy at the end of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus said there's a wise man, a foolish man who builds his house on sand. He's like the man who hears the words and he doesn't put them into practice. And then there's a wise man who builds his house on the rock. He hears the word and he's putting it into practice. He's doing the thing. And the same wind, the same waves come and beat against that house, but it doesn't fall because it's built on a rock. And we are now going to transition into what we suggest that you do in order to integrate these strategies to grow your relationship in this area. How are you going to build on the rock this week? How is your marriage going to avoid this fourth horseman of the apocalypse? So we're going to share a couple strategies. Coach Elary, you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. So Gottman, when you have his your antidotes, we've been talking about a lot of the antidotes today. The antidote to stonewalling is self-soothing, right? And it makes sense because they kind of come in pairs, right? We've got the criticism and the contempt, and then we've got the defensive,ness, the stonewalling. And so one of the things that you have to do is take the responsibility, which is the antidote to defensiveness. First, you have to take that responsibility to self-soothe, right? So you get into a circumstance. And so you can do this a number of ways, right? So if you can find yourself, you're noticing that you're flooding, right? And you have a physiological change to that, okay? And so before you start stonewalling, you can stay in the conversation, right? And you can change your breathing. And you stay present. And you can go, yes, and you're tracking. And maybe you're not tracking that closely because you're actually trying to monitor your breathing so that you can stay there. But eventually, hopefully that's going to be able to give you just the space that you need in order to be able to stay there instead of being totally flooded out and going into stonewalling, that you can start to self-soothe that way. But then ultimately, a lot of times what's going to need to be is that it needs to be, hey, time out. Okay. I'm sorry. And to kind of be able to say those things, kind of realizing really what you're trying to do by stonewalling, be able to articulate that, I'm getting to a place right now, this is very flooding or triggering for me. I'm getting to a place I can't show up for you right now how you want me to show up for you, to be able to listen to you and to be able to work on this. So can we come back and have this discussion later?
Wow. Can I just highlight that as a man? Like
Yes.
what you just said, if we learn to practice that, maybe that 85% of men that are engaging in stonewalling could be cut in half. To just be able to say, hey, you know what? I'm here. This matters. But right now, I don't think it would be most productive because I love you. Let's continue this at 5:00 tonight after, let's continue this, tomorrow morning after breakfast. Let's continue this so that we have a definitive time. How impactful would that minor shift be to not have a blanket stonewall, but to just say, hey, not now. Let's continue this later. My question to you, Elary, as we're playing is, does that begin to take away, diminish to some extent the feeling of abandonment? If as men, we're able to say, hey, you know what? I hear you. I'm present, but I'm feeling overwhelmed. I don't really know what to think, but I think that table this for right now. And if we come back to it at this previously determined time, does that help reduce the anxiety, reduce the fear of abandonment in that moment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it also has the husband taking responsibility and leadership for the problem. It's
Mm.
not to say this is your problem, you've got to work it out. It's taking that and saying, I love what you're saying as far as this matters to me. I want to be totally present and I want us to do something that's actually going to help. And right now, I'm not going to help. I'm being really honest with you, right? And it's so important that a wife accept that,
Mhm.
right? Because that's the respect issue as well.
Mm.
Say, okay, absolutely. I respect what you're doing.
Oh, that's good. If I can just jump in, I can tell you so many stories. And my best friend in the whole world used to work in the correctional institution, and there's a lot of stories that he has seen. Good people, degreed people, professional people, white collar, blue collar, all kinds of people who this correctional facility was one that housed men, and there were men who just tried to get out of the situation, and they weren't permitted to. It just continued and continued and continued. Sometimes they were cornered, sometimes people followed them, sometimes people got in the car with them, and they snapped. And in that one moment, life is now different. Life for the entire family, not just for him, for the
Mm-hmm.
entire family. The financial situation for the family is now different because there was no respect to the timeout. Hey, I just need a timeout. I'm still here, but can we do this? This isn't really working right now. I need a timeout. And I want to speak just briefly to men and women to say that, hey, if we can have respect for the timeout, we can prevent a host of evil, a host of challenges and difficulties that aren't leading to anything good for anyone. As men, when we're given the respect of taking that time out, it allows us to be able to regroup and to come back as our best selves, to make sure that you know that we're not abandoning you. We
Mm-hmm.
just need a timeout. That breather also can be one that protects our families physically, emotionally, spiritually. And I just want to bring that point because it is a respect issue when one partner says, I need a timeout. And I'll be the first to tell you, I was guilty of like, no, there's no time. We've got to solve this now. And it's not a good approach to take. It doesn't produce, it's disrespectful, and it doesn't produce a a reaction that is going to bring about anything good.
Absolutely. And in so many ways, demanding that we talk about this now is the same as stonewalling
Wow. Break that down.
because
Brief, brief.
it has no respect for the other person. It says, just like the stonewalling says, I don't care how much pain you're in, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. This is over. Right. In the same ways, I don't care how flooded you feel. We're going to talk about this right now. We're going to, so he's saying, we're going to stop so that I can feel better. And she's saying, we're going to keep going so that I can feel better.
It's a bad idea. It's a
It's a
bad
bad idea.
idea.
It's a bad idea.
And
And because, oh, I got to say it, because our belief in our relationship is so much about sacrifice. So if you are putting your feelings in front of my feelings, your well-being in front of my well-being, right? It's more important for you to feel okay than it is for me to feel okay. Then how can you even
wow.
love me?
Wow.
Right? But they're both feeling that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In that stonewalling circumstance, both partners are actually feeling the exact same way.
And let me just say this, if you're in a downward spiral, I want you to know that, hey, you know what? There are solutions. We have a crisis coaching call that we offer. The M Squad can handle some basics, but I don't want you to stay in isolation. Know that it's not a matter of if, but when. when you find yourself in these situations, reach out and get help. This is called Let's Grow Together for a reason, because in isolation, growth doesn't really happen as much as it can in these spaces where we have transformational relationships, coaches, counselors, therapists that can help guide us with the right tools to a better path. And we could really go on and on and on, Elary, on this, but I think it's really important to talk about those gender differences because, man, there's so much that goes wrong when we get to stonewalling, when we get to demanding. We're going to talk about this right now, when we don't know that other tools exist than a hammer, to be able to solve problems and reconstruct a relationship that's mutually beneficial. Nobody gets married to divorce, but the reason so many do is they don't know this stuff. They're not paying attention to the data and to the patterns that researchers like Gottman are pointing out. And we're here to, if you haven't read the book, to provide the conversation and dialogue and the admonition to avoid these behaviors and to consider an alternative, because love should last a lifetime, and it can if you follow the right blueprint.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Grow in Love Show. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single podcast. And remember, every relationship always has room to grow.